Jonathan Hale stepped into the penthouse at 1:47 a.m. Something was wrong. The housekeeping cart sat wedged in the doorway, half loaded, towels folded on one side, cleaning supplies still out. The bedroom door stood ajar, soft light bleeding through the gap. He didn't call security. Not yet. He pushed the door wider. A woman in a faded hotel uniform slumped on the corner sofa. A small child curled against her chest. Both asleep. The turn-down service half-finished fresh sheets on one side of the bed, the other still bare. She hadn't broken in. She'd collapsed mid-shift. Jonathan's hand hovered over his phone. The child stirred. Small fingers tightened around a stuffed rabbit, one ear torn. Stitched back with mismatched blue thread. 5 minutes, he told himself. Give her 5 minutes before I decide. If you're watching late tonight, I'd love to know where you tuning in from. Sometimes the quietest hours bring us the stories that stay with us longest. Jonathan moved closer. Slowly, the way he approached hostile boardrooms gathering information before making a move. The woman's uniform had faded from navy to something closer to gray. Washed too many times. The hotel logo on her chest pocket, cracked and peeling. She'd been here a while. Not new staff, no purse, no phone visible, just a small canvas bag near her feet, cartoon ducks printed on it. The colors worn thin. A child's bag. He looked at her hands. Calloused, nails cut short, no polish. An old scar stretched across the back of her right hand, a burn. Long healed, the skin slightly puckered. Those weren't the hands of someone running a con. He knew. He'd learned the hard way. Margaret's hands had been soft, manicured. She touched his arm when she laughed, and he'd thought it meant something. 2 years, half his trust fund, a divorce that made the papers. You're too suspicious, his therapist had said afterward. Not everyone wants something from you. But everyone did. Everyone always did. The child shifted against her mother. The stuffed rabbit nearly slipped from her grip. Small fingers tightened around it, reflexive, even in sleep. Jonathan stared at that rabbit, one ear torn at the seam, stitched back with thread that didn't match. Blue thread on brown fabric. Someone had fixed it. Not professionally, not prettily, just fixed it because it mattered. The woman's breathing stayed steady. Deep exhaustion. The kind that didn't wake for small noises. He checked his watch, 1:52 a.m., the housekeeping cart in the doorway, half the job done. She'd been working, then stopped, sat down for a moment, and her body had simply quit. 14-hour shift? Maybe. Longer? And the child? Why was the child here at all? Who brings a 5-year-old to a night shift at a hotel? Someone with no other choice. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Don't, he told himself. Don't start making excuses for her. You don't know anything yet. He stepped back. His shoe scraped against the marble floor. The child's eyes opened. No cry, no startle, just 2 small eyes finding him in the dim light. Watching. Waiting. Like she'd done this before. Woken up somewhere unfamiliar. Learned not to make noise. Jonathan froze. The girl didn't blink. Didn't call for her mother. She just looked at him and he had no idea what to say. The girl couldn't be more than 5, maybe 6. Small for her age, whichever it was. She held the rabbit against her chest. Her eyes dark. Steady, tracked Jonathan the way a cat watches movement. Not scared. Assessing. Jonathan's throat went dry. When was the last time he'd talked to a child really talked Christmas 3 years ago? His sister's kids. He'd handed them gift cards and escaped to the study within 20 minutes. Hey, he said. His voice came out rougher than intended. The girl didn't respond. Didn't move. just kept watching. Behind her, the woman stirred. It happened fast. One moment she was asleep. The next, her arms were around the child, pulling her close, body curling forward like a shield. Pure instinct. No thought. Then her eyes opened. Found Jonathan. The color drained from her face. She didn't scream, didn't jump up. For 3 long seconds, she just stared at him, processing, calculating, understanding exactly how bad this was. Then she moved. Carefully. Deliberately. She shifted the child behind her as she stood, keeping herself between Jonathan and the girl. Her uniform was wrinkled, a crease mark on her cheek from the sofa cushion, but her spine was straight. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was steady, hoarse from sleep, but controlled. "We'll leave right now." Jonathan didn't move. "How did you get in here?" "I work here." She gestured toward the half-made bed. "Night, turned down. I was finishing the room and She stopped, swallowed. "I sat down for a moment. I don't remember falling asleep. With a child." Her jaw tightened. "My daughter, she's been sick. Fever broke yesterday, but I couldn't find anyone to watch her tonight." The words came out flat. Facts, not excuses. "Someone called in sick. They needed coverage for a double. I couldn't say no, I've already missed too many shifts this month." The girl, her daughter, peeked around her mother's hip, still clutching that rabbit. "Mama," she whispered. "Is he mad?" "Shh, baby, it's okay." But she didn't answer the question. Jonathan looked at them. The faded uniform. The child in pajamas, thin cotton, cartoon stars, slightly too big, probably second-hand. The canvas bag with the worn ducks. Everything about them screamed exhaustion and barely getting by. "What time did your shift start?" he asked. The woman hesitated. "Noon." Noon. It was almost 2 in the morning. 14 hours. With a sick child. "You've been working 14 hours straight. It's a double." Her chin lifted slightly. "They needed coverage. I needed the hours." Jonathan's phone was still in his hand. The screen had gone dark. One tap and he could light it up. Call the front desk and have security here in 3 minutes. That was the smart move. The safe move. Get them out, file a complaint, move on with his night. The woman watched him. She saw the phone, understood what it meant. "Please," she said. The word seemed to cost her something. "Don't call the manager. Not please let us stay. Not please don't be angry." "Don't call the manager." "Why?" Jonathan asked. "What happens if I do?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I lose my job. For falling asleep. For bringing her." She glanced down at her daughter. "There's a policy. No children on property during shifts. I knew that when She stopped. Started again. "I made a choice, but if Mr. Moore finds out, I'm done. No warning. No second chance." Moore, the night manager. Jonathan had met him once. Slick smile. Firm handshake. The kind of aggressive professionalism that always felt like performance. "And if you lose this job..." The woman didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer was written in everything: the worn uniform, the sick child, the 14-hour shift she couldn't afford to miss. This job was all she had. Jonathan should call. He knew that. A strange woman and child in his room that was a security issue, a liability issue. The hotel would want to know. But he kept seeing her hands, those calluses, that burn scar. He kept seeing the way she'd pulled her daughter close before she'd even opened her eyes. Instinct, protection, first and only thought. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Giving a name meant something, made her a person instead of a problem. "Clara," she said finally. Clara Santos. And Clara's hand found her daughter's shoulder. Protective, automatic. Lily. The girl looked up at him, still holding that rabbit, still watching with those steady, was-too-old eyes. Hi, she said, soft, cautious, testing. Jonathan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Clara straightened. We'll go, right now. If you could just... She paused, collecting herself. If you could give us until morning before you report anything, I can find somewhere else to... Where? What? Where will you go? It's 2 a.m. She didn't have an answer. He could see her searching for one, coming up empty. The child tugged at her mother's uniform. Mama, I'm tired. I know, baby. I know. Jonathan looked at them, the exhausted woman in her faded uniform, the small girl with her patched-up rabbit, standing in his penthouse at 2 a.m, with nowhere to go and nothing to bargain with. And she wasn't begging, wasn't crying, wasn't trying to manipulate him with guilt or flattery or anything else he'd seen 100 times before. She was just standing there, waiting, accepting whatever he decided. Ask for something. He thought. Make a demand. Try to negotiate. Do what everyone else does. But she didn't. She just stood there, spine straight, hand on her daughter's shoulder, waiting for the axe to fall. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair. Sit down, he said. Clara blinked. What? Sit down. Both of you. He moved toward the minibar. The kid looks like she's about to fall over. And you... He stopped, turned back. When's the last time you ate something? Clara didn't move. Didn't sit. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not suspicion exactly, but something close to it. Why? She asked. Jonathan paused, his hand on the minibar door. It was a good question. He didn't have a good answer. Jonathan pulled a bottle of water from the minibar, then a packet of crackers. He set them on the coffee table without ceremony. Eat, he said. Then we figure out what to do. Clara didn't move toward the food. Neither did Lily. Mr. Hale, how do you know my name? You're in the penthouse. Her voice was flat. Everyone knows who stays in the penthouse. Fair enough. Lily coughed, a dry, rattling sound that came from somewhere deep in her small chest. Clara's hand went to her daughter's forehead, automatically checking for fever. The gesture was practiced, routine. She needs rest, Jonathan said. You both do. Stay until morning. Sort this out then. Clara shook her head. We can't. Why not? I don't take handouts. 4 words. She said them simply, without drama, like stating a fact about the weather. Jonathan stared at her. In his world, everyone took handouts. Everyone wanted something, an introduction, an investment, a favor they'd call a partnership. The cleaning staff wanted overtime. The executives wanted bonuses. Even the charities wanted his name on their letterhead more than his money. Everyone had an angle. Everyone. You're exhausted, he said. Your kid is sick. It's 2 a.m. and you have nowhere to go. This isn't charity, it's common sense. Clara's jaw tightened. I know what it is. Then why? Because I know how these things work. She met his eyes directly. No flinching. You let me stay tonight. Tomorrow you feel good about yourself. Maybe you mention it to someone, the manager, a friend about the cleaning lady you helped out, and then I owe you. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but sooner or later, there's a price. Jonathan felt something shift in his chest, an uncomfortable recognition. That's not... It is. Clara's voice stayed steady. It always is. Nothing's free. Mr. Hale, I learned that the hard way. The things you don't earn are the things that get taken back. Lily coughed again, harder this time. Her small body shook with the effort, and Clara's arm tightened around her automatically. "Mama," Lily whispered, "can we go home now?" "Soon, baby, soon." But where was home? Jonathan looked at them, really looked. The faded uniform, the worn bag, the child in 2 big pajamas. These weren't people with backup options. These were people running on fumes and willpower. "You don't have anywhere to go," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara didn't answer, which was answer enough. "What happens if you leave right now?" "Walk out into the hall with her." "Still nothing?" "You finish your shift. Sleep in the break room. Take her home on the bus at 6 a.m. when you can barely stand." Clara's hand trembled slightly on Lily's shoulder, just for a second. Then it steadied. "That's my problem," she said. "Not yours. You made it my problem when you fell asleep in my room. I made a mistake. I'll deal with the consequences." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair. This wasn't how these conversations were supposed to go. People were supposed to want things from him. They were supposed to negotiate, plead, manipulate. That was the game. That was how it worked. She wasn't playing. "Look," he said, "I'm not trying to—" He stopped. Started again. "I don't want anything from you. I'm just saying it's late. The kid's sick. Take the water and crackers. Let her rest a few hours. And leave before the day shift starts. Nobody has to know." Clara studied him. Her eyes moved across his face like she was reading a contract, looking for the fine print. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I'm the person who fell asleep in your room. You should be angry. You should be calling security right now." She tilted her head slightly. "So, why aren't you—" Jonathan didn't have an answer. He thought about Margaret again. How easily she'd taken. How smoothly she'd maneuvered. How he'd believed every word until the lawyers got involved. Clara wasn't like Margaret. He could see that now. Margaret had been soft hands and softer lies. Clara was calluses and blunt truths, but that didn't mean he could trust her. It just meant she was different. Or maybe she's exactly what she seems. A voice whispered, "Maybe not everyone is running a He pushed the thought away. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know why I'm not calling security. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I've had a long day and I don't want to deal with paperwork." He shrugged. "Maybe I'm just curious. Curious about what? About why you'd rather walk out of here at 2 in the morning with a sick kid than accept help from a stranger." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Lily had gone still against her, fighting sleep. The rabbit dangled from one small fist. "Because help always costs something," Claire said finally. "And I can't afford any more debts." And the words hung in the air. Jonathan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that not everyone kept score, that sometimes people just helped because it was the right thing to do, but he'd stopped believing that himself a long time ago. "Okay," he said. "Fine. I won't push. But at least let her sit down while you figure out your next move. She's dead on her feet." Clara hesitated, looked down at Lily. The girl's eyes were half closed, her body swaying slightly. Finally. Clara nodded, just barely. She guided Lily back to the sofa, the same spot where they'd been sleeping. The girl curled up immediately. Rabbit tucked under her chin, within seconds. Her breathing slowed. Clara stayed standing, arms crossed, keeping distance. "I'll leave as soon as she gets a few minutes of rest," she said. "Then we're gone. Take your time. I don't need your permission. I know." They stood there in the silence, Jonathan by the minibar, Clara by the sofa, 2 strangers with nothing in common except this strange, Suspended moment. Lily coughed in her sleep. A wet, rattling sound. Claire's face tightened. Her hand reached out, brushed the girl's hair. "Has she seen a doctor?" Jonathan asked. "She's fine. Just a cold." "That cough doesn't sound like just a cold." "I said she's fine." Clara's voice sharpened. Then she caught herself. Exhaled slowly. "I know what she needs. I'm her mother." Jonathan raised his hands. Okay. More silence. Then the door to the penthouse opened. Jonathan turned. Clara went rigid. A man stood in the doorway, mid-40s, vest over a crisp white shirt, hotel badge gleaming under the hallway light. His face was composed, professional until he saw Clara. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Something cold. "Mr. Hale," the man said, his voice smoothly controlled. "Is there a problem here?" Richard Moore. Jonathan recognized him now. Night manager. They'd crossed paths once before a brief introduction when Jonathan first checked in. The man had been all smiles then, eager to accommodate. He wasn't smiling now. "I was doing rounds and noticed the housekeeping card still in the doorway," Richard said, stepping into the room. His master key dangled from a lanyard at his belt. His eyes swept over Clara, then Lily on the sofa, then back to Jonathan. "I apologize for any inconvenience. Mr. Hale, this shouldn't have happened." "It's fine," Jonathan said. "We were just— I'll handle it from here." Richard's voice was smooth, but there was something underneath, an edge. He turned to Clara, and his entire demeanor shifted. The professional warmth vanished. What replaced it was cold, controlled, the kind of quiet menace that didn't need volume. "Ms. Santos," he said, "would you like to explain why you're in a guest room at 2 a.m. with a child?" Clara straightened. Her face had gone pale, but her voice held steady. "I was finishing turn-down service. I sat down for a moment and— You fell asleep?" "Yes." "In a guest's room?" "Yes." "With your daughter, who is not supposed to be on property during your shift?" Richard's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "You know that's a termination offense. Immediate. No appeal." Clara said nothing. Her hand found Lily's shoulder. The girl had woken, was sitting up now, watching with wide eyes. "Mr. Moore," Jonathan said, "I don't think we need to— Mr. Hale, I appreciate your understanding, but this is an internal matter." Richard didn't look at him. His focus stayed locked on Clara. "Ms. Santos has a history of issues. This isn't the first time we've had concerns about her conduct." Jonathan frowned. "What kind of issues?" "Personnel matters. Confidential." Richard's voice dropped lower, directed at Clara. "But we both know what's in your file, don't we?" Something flickered across Clara's face. Not just fear, something older, deeper. "That has nothing to do with tonight," she said quietly. "Everything in your file is relevant when you're standing in a guest's penthouse at 2 a.m. with a child who shouldn't be here." Richard took a step closer to her. "You know the rules. You signed the handbook. And yet here we are." Again, Jonathan watched the exchange. Something was wrong. He'd sat across from hundreds of people in negotiations, hostile takeovers, contract disputes. He knew what aggression looked like when it was about business. This wasn't that. This was personal. Richard was standing too close to Clara, his voice too controlled. There was a satisfaction in his posture, subtle, but visible if you knew how to look. He wasn't just enforcing policy. He was enjoying this. "Mr. Moore," Jonathan said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Richard finally turned to him. The professional mask slid back into place instantly. "Of course. Mr. Hale, please, what can I clarify? I asked her to stay." Silence. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm sorry. Miss Santos was finishing the room when I came in. I asked her to wait. I had some questions about the amenities. The lie came easily. Boardroom reflexes. Her daughter was with her because of a childcare emergency. I was aware of the situation. Richard's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Calculation. That's very understanding of you, Mr. Hale. But hotel policy still requires— I'm not interested in hotel policy right now. Jonathan kept his voice level. I'm interested in getting some rest, and I'd prefer not to spend my night filling out incident reports because your staff was trying to answer my questions. The room went quiet. Richard stood very still. His jaw worked slightly, the only sign that the conversation wasn't going the way he'd planned. Of course, he said finally. If you're satisfied with the situation, then there's no need for formal documentation. He turned to Clara. You can finish your shift. We'll discuss this tomorrow. The words were professional. The tone was not. There was a promise in it, a threat. Clara nodded once. Yes, sir. Richard moved toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Clara— He glanced back over his shoulder. Make sure you're in my office at 8 a.m. sharp. We have a lot to discuss about your performance history. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was thick. Clara's hands were shaking. A fine tremor she couldn't quite control. She pressed them flat against her thighs. You shouldn't have done that, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Done what? Lied for me. He'll know. He always figures it out. She shook her head. And now you're involved, which means— She stopped, pressed her lips together. Which means what? Nothing. It doesn't matter. Clara moved to the sofa, began gathering the canvas bag, reaching for Lily. We need to go. I have to finish my rounds before— What did he mean? Clara paused. What? Your performance history? Your file? Jonathan watched her face carefully. What's in it? I told you. It's nothing. Old paperwork. It mattered to him. The way he said it, like he was holding something over you. Clara's shoulders tensed. She didn't turn around. Mr. Hale, you've already done more than you should. Please, just let us leave and forget any of this happened. I can't do that. Now she turned. Her eyes were tired. So tired. Why not? Because something's off here. The way he talked to you, that wasn't a manager dealing with an employee issue. That was something else. Clara stared at him for a long moment. Then she let out a breath that seemed to drain something from her. You don't want to get involved in this, she said. Trust me. I'm already involved. Then uninvolve yourself. It's better for everyone. Lily had been quiet through all of it, but now she moved, sliding off the sofa. Her rabbit clutched against her chest. She walked to her mother and pressed against her leg. Mama, she whispered, is the bad man coming back? Jonathan felt something cold move through his chest. The bad man. Not the manager, not that man. The bad man, said with the certainty of a child who had learned to be afraid of someone specific. Clara's hand found Lily's hair, stroked it gently. No, baby. He's gone now. It's okay. But her eyes told a different story. Jonathan looked at them, the exhausted woman, the small girl pressing close, and something clicked into place. Lily wasn't afraid of strangers. She was afraid of Richard Moore, which meant this wasn't about tonight. This was about something that had happened before, something Clara wasn't telling him. What did he do to you? Jonathan asked quietly. Clara's hand stilled on Lily's head. She didn't answer. The silence stretched. Clara's face had closed off completely, a wall sliding into place. It doesn't matter what happened before, she said. Tonight is tonight, and tonight, I made a mistake. That's all Mr. Moore needs to know. That's not all he knows. Jonathan took a step closer. The way he talked to you that wasn't about hotel policy, that was personal. You're imagining things. Am I? Because your daughter just called him the bad man? Kids don't say that about strangers. Clara's hand tightened on Lily's shoulder. The girl had gone quiet, pressing her face against her mother's leg. Children say things, Clara said. It doesn't mean... The door opened again. Richard Moore stepped back into the penthouse. This time, he wasn't alone. A security guard stood behind him, young, broad-shouldered, shifting his weight like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Hale, Richard said. His voice had shifted. Harder now, more certain. I've reconsidered the situation. Given the circumstances, I think it's best if we remove Ms. Santos from the premises immediately. For your safety and comfort. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I told you, there's no problem here. With respect, sir, you don't have all the information. Richard's eyes flicked to Clara. Miss Santos has a history of incidents, complaints from other guests, behavioral issues. The hotel has been patient, but tonight crosses a line. What incidents? I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel matters in detail. Richard's smile was thin, practiced. But I can assure you, this isn't the first time she's overstepped boundaries. Jonathan looked at Clara. She stood rigid, her face bloodless. Is that true? He asked. Clara's mouth opened, closed. Her hands were trembling again, that fine tremor she couldn't hide. No, she said. That's not he's twisting things. There were no complaints. I never... Ms. Santos... Richard's voice cut through like a blade. Perhaps we should discuss your file. The incident at St. Mary's, for instance, the reason you're cleaning hotel rooms instead of working in your actual profession. Clara went still, completely, utterly still. Something changed in her face. The fear drained away, replaced by something harder, older. That has nothing to do with this, she said quietly. It has everything to do with this. It speaks to character, to judgment, to a pattern of behavior that puts others at risk. You have no right. I have every right. I'm your supervisor. And when a guest's safety is potentially compromised by an employee with your history... What history? Jonathan stepped between them. What are you talking about? What happened at St. Mary's? Richard's smile widened slightly. Ask her. Jonathan turned to Clara. What is he talking about? Clara's eyes were fixed on Richard, not on Jonathan, and her expression, it wasn't the look of someone caught in a lie. It was the look of someone watching an old wound being torn open. Tell him, Richard said. Tell him why you lost your nursing license. Tell him what kind of person you really are. Lily began to cry. Not loud, no sobbing, just tears streaming silently down her small face as she pressed against her mother's leg. She didn't make a sound, like she'd learned that crying out loud made things worse. Clara dropped to her knees instantly. Baby, baby, it's okay. Mama's here. Shh. But Lily kept crying. Silent tears that seemed worse than screaming. Jonathan watched them, the mother on her knees, the child crying without sound, and felt something shift in his chest, a crack in something he'd built carefully over years. He turned to Richard. Get out, Richard blinked. Excuse me. Get out of my room, now. Mr. Hale, I understand you're uncomfortable, but... I said get out. Jonathan's voice dropped, cold, the voice he used in boardrooms when negotiations were over. Take your security guard and leave. I don't want to see you again tonight. Richard's face flushed. The professional mask slipped for just a moment, and underneath, Jonathan saw something ugly, something petty and vindictive. Mr. Hale, I must insist. You can insist all you want. This is my room. I'm a guest in your hotel, a guest who pays more per night than most people earn in a week, and I'm telling you to leave. The security guard shifted uncomfortably, looked at Richard. His hand moved to his radio, then dropped. Richard's jaw worked. His hands clenched at his sides. "Fine," he said finally. "But this isn't over. Miss Santos will be in my office at 8 a.m., and I can assure you, Mr. Hale by tomorrow. She won't be an employee of this hotel anymore." He turned and walked out. The security guard followed, pulling the door shut behind them. Silence. Clara stayed on her knees, holding Lily. The girl's tears had slowed, but her small body still shook with residual tremors. "Mama," she whispered, "I don't want to go to the bad man's office." "You won't. Baby, you won't have to." But Clara's voice cracked on the words. She knew. They both knew. Richard had won. He'd just delayed it by a few hours. Jonathan stood there, watching them. The exhausted woman, the frightened child, the weight of something he didn't fully understand pressing down on all of them. "What happened at St. Mary's?" he asked quietly. Clara didn't look up. Her hand stroked Lily's hair in slow, rhythmic movements. "It doesn't matter. It matters to him. He's using it against you. He's been using it against me for 2 years. That's not going to change." 2 years. Jonathan frowned. "He's known about this for 2 years. Clara's hand stilled on Lily's hair. She looked up at him finally, and her eyes, they weren't defeated. They weren't scared. They were tired. So deeply tired. Like someone who'd been fighting a battle alone for far too long. "He should know," she said. "He was there." Jonathan felt the words land like a punch. "What do you mean, he was there?" Clara rose slowly to her feet. She lifted Lily onto her hip. The girl was getting too big to carry easily, but Clara held her anyway, an anchor, a reminder of what mattered. "Before this place," Clara said. "Before I cleaned hotel rooms, before any of this," she took a breath. "I was a nurse at St. Mary's Medical Center. I was good at it. I thought it was what I'd do for the rest of my life." "What happened?" "There was an incident, a medication error. A patient almost died." Clara's voice was flat, reciting facts. Someone had to take responsibility. Someone had to lose their license so the hospital could say they'd handled it. And that someone was you, yes, but you didn't make the error. Clara's jaw tightened. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The way you said it, someone had to take responsibility. Not, I made a mistake. Not, I was careless. Someone had to take responsibility." Jonathan stepped closer. "Who really made the error?" "Clara." She didn't answer, but her eyes moved, just for a second, toward the door, toward where Richard Moore had been standing. And Jonathan understood. "It was him," he said slowly. "Richard made the mistake, and you took the fall." Clara's silence was confirmation enough. "Why?" Jonathan asked. "Why would you do that? Why would you destroy your career to protect someone like him?" Clara's arms tightened around Lily. "I wasn't protecting him," she said quietly. "I was protecting the patient." Jonathan stared at her. "What do you mean, protecting the patient?" Clara set Lily down on the sofa. The girl curled up immediately, clutching her rabbit, eyes already half closed. Exhaustion finally winning. Clara watched her daughter for a moment. Then she turned back to Jonathan. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes more visible now. She swayed slightly, caught herself on the arm of the sofa. "Sit down," Jonathan said, "before you fall down." She shook her head. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've been on your feet for 14 hours. Sit." Clara hesitated. Then her knees seemed to give, and she sank onto the edge of the sofa beside Lily, her hands folded in her lap tight, controlled. The patient was a 63-year-old woman. She said, her voice had gone flat, clinical, the voice of someone who told this story to herself 1,000 times. Mrs. Patterson, she'd been in the ICU for 2 weeks after a stroke, finally stable enough to be moved to the regular ward. Clara's voice was steady. Richard was the charge nurse that night. I was under his supervision. What happened? He administered the wrong medication. A dosage error, he grabbed the wrong vial. Didn't double-check. By the time anyone noticed, Mrs. Patterson was coding. Jonathan's stomach tightened. But she survived. Because I caught it. I was doing my rounds when I saw her vitals crashing. I called the code, started emergency intervention, got the attending physician there in time. Clara's hands tightened in her lap. She survived. Barely. And Richard was in the break room when it happened. He'd left the floor without telling anyone, that's why no one caught the error sooner. He was supposed to be monitoring her. So you saved her life. And then what? You took the blame for his mistake. Clara was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved to the window, to the gray light beginning to seep through the curtains. Dawn wasn't far off now. It wasn't that simple, she said. When the hospital investigated, Richard panicked. He came to me, shaking, crying. Said he could lose his license, his career, everything he'd worked for. He had a wife, 2 kids in private school. He said if the truth came out, it would destroy his family. And you believed him. I believed he was scared. I believed he was sorry. Clara's voice hardened slightly. I was wrong about both. What happened? He asked me to cover for him. Just fudge the timeline a little. Make it look like I was the one who administered the medication. He said the hospital would go easier on me. I was younger, less experienced. They'd see it as a training issue instead of negligence. Jonathan felt something cold crawling up his spine. And you agreed to think about it. But before I could decide anything, the hospital administrator called me into a meeting. Clara's jaw tightened. Richard had already talked to them, told them I was struggling, that I'd made errors before, that he'd been covering for me for months out of kindness. He framed you. He protected himself. Clara's voice was flat. By the time I walked into that meeting, the decision had already been made. They had documentation reports Richard had falsified, complaints he'd invented, a paper trail that made me look incompetent. And Mrs. Patterson's family was threatening to sue. The hospital needed someone to blame. Jonathan's hands had curled into fists at his sides. You could have fought it, told the truth, hired a lawyer. With what money? Clara looked at him. I was a nurse making $40,000 a year. Richard had connections, seniority, a spotless record he'd carefully maintained. It was my word against his. She shook her head. And even if I'd won, Mrs. Patterson was still in recovery, still fragile. If the lawsuit dragged on, if the investigation went public, she'd have been caught in the middle of it. Depositions, stress, her care questioned at every step. So you just took it? I signed a statement accepting responsibility. The hospital settled quietly with the family. Mrs. Patterson got to recover in peace. Clara's voice dropped. And I lost my license. Everything, Jonathan said quietly. You lost everything. Clara didn't look at him, said her hands were shaking again, that fine tremor she couldn't control. She pressed them flat against her thighs. My license, my career, my apartment, couldn't afford rent without a nursing salary. Her voice cracked, just slightly. My husband left 6 months later. Said he didn't sign up to be married to a failure. Said he was embarrassed to tell people what his wife did for a living. She stopped, swallowed hard. I had to move in with my mother, 43 years old, living in my childhood bedroom with a 2-year-old, applying for jobs at grocery stores and getting rejected because I was overqualified. A bitter sound escaped her throat, not quite a laugh. You know what it's like to have your mother look at you with pity, to see your daughter playing on the floor of a room with your high school trophies on the shelf, wondering what happened to the person who won them. Jonathan didn't answer. He didn't know. I finally got this job 18 months ago, Clara continued. Housekeeping. Night shift, minimum wage, plus tips that barely exist. And I was grateful. Grateful to scrub toilets and change sheets, because at least it was something. At least I could look Lily in the eye and say Mama has a job. Her voice broke on the last word. She pressed a hand to her mouth, turned away. Then Richard transferred here 6 months ago, she said, her voice muffled. He saw my name on the schedule and he just smiled, like he'd won the lottery, and I knew he'd followed me. Why would he do that? Clara turned back. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying, not quite. She looked like someone who'd run out of tears a long time ago. Because as long as I'm here, under his control, I can't talk. I can't tell anyone what really happened. He's got my job in his hands, one word from him, and I'm gone. No reference. No unemployment. Nothing. She laughed a hollow, broken sound. He stops by my cart sometimes, just to check in, and he says, just to make sure I'm keeping up with my work. But really, he's reminding me that he owns me. Jonathan stood there, silent. He'd spent his whole life learning to read people, to see through lies and manipulation. And tonight, he'd almost called security on a woman who'd sacrificed everything to protect a patient she barely knew. He'd looked at her and seen a threat, a problem, something to be managed. He hadn't seen her at all. At Clara, he said. She didn't look at him. Her shoulders were shaking now, small, silent tremors she was fighting to control. I didn't know, he said. I didn't. It doesn't matter. Her voice was thick. It doesn't change anything. Tomorrow morning, I'll walk into his office, and he'll fire me. And that will be it. Another job gone, another place I can't go back to. And Lily, she stopped, pressed both hands to her face. Lily deserves better than this, she whispered. She deserves a mother who isn't a failure, who isn't always tired, always scared, always one bad day away from losing everything. Her voice cracked completely. She deserves so much better than me. The words hung in the air, raw, broken. Jonathan watched her, this woman who'd given up her career to save a stranger's life, who'd been punished for someone else's mistake, who'd spent years rebuilding from nothing, only to have the same man tear it all down again. And something shifted inside him, something that had been locked away for a very long time. What if it doesn't have to be that way? He asked quietly. Clara lowered her hands. Her face was streaked with tears she hadn't quite managed to hide. She looked at him with something close to pity. Mr. Hale, you seem like a decent man. But you don't understand how this works. Men like Richard, they always win. They have the power, the connections, the paperwork. People like me, she shook her head. We just try to survive until they get bored. And if someone didn't let them win, Clara stared at him. What are you saying? Jonathan didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he looked at Clara, the exhausted woman in her faded uniform, tears drying on her cheeks, fighting to hold on to whatever dignity she had left. Then he looked at Lily, the small girl sleeping on his sofa, clutching a rabbit with a mended ear, dreaming of something better. And finally, he thought about Richard more. The satisfied smile, the power he wielded so casually, the way he'd stood in this room and looked at Clara like she was dirt beneath his shoe. Jonathan had spent years protecting himself from people who wanted to use him, building walls, trusting no one. But maybe he'd been protecting himself from the wrong people. "I'm saying," Jonathan said slowly, "that tomorrow morning, you're not going to that meeting alone." Clara's eyes widened. "Mr. Hale?" "Jonathan." He moved toward the door. "And we have a lot to figure out before 8 a.m. The meeting never happened in Richard's office. Jonathan made sure of that. At 7:45 a.m., he walked into the hotel lobby with Clara beside him. His eyes felt gritty, his neck stiff from hours hunched over his phone making calls. He'd lost count of how many cups of coffee he'd had. 4, maybe 5. His hands had a slight tremor from the caffeine. Lily was asleep upstairs. An elderly woman from the room next door, Mrs. Chen. She'd introduced herself, had heard Clara's voice in the hallway around 6 a.m. and offered to watch the girl. "I raised 4 of my own," she'd said. "1 more won't hurt for an hour." Small mercies. Jonathan was learning to recognize them. Richard was waiting near the front desk, speaking with the day shift manager. His face changed when he saw them together, the professional smile freezing, then dropping away entirely. "Mr. Hale?" Richard's voice was smooth, but his eyes had gone flat. "I wasn't expecting to see you this morning. I'm sure you weren't." Jonathan stopped in front of him, close, deliberate. "We need to talk. You, me, and Miss Santos, somewhere private." "That won't be necessary. This is a personnel matter." "It stopped being a personnel matter when you walked into my room last night and threatened my guest." Richard's jaw tightened. The day shift manager, a young woman with a name tag reading Sophie, looked between them with obvious discomfort. "Perhaps we should use the conference room," Sophie offered. "That won't be necessary," Richard said quickly. "Mr. Hale, whatever Miss Santos has told you, she told me about St. Mary's." The words landed like a slap. Richard's face went white, then red. His mouth opened, closed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Jonathan kept his voice level. "Mrs. Patterson, the medication error, the investigation that ended with Clara losing her license while you got promoted." The lobby had gone quiet. A bellhop near the door had stopped pretending to arrange luggage. Sophie's eyes were wide. "This is inappropriate," Richard said. His voice had risen slightly. "These are private matters. Personnel files. You have no right." "I made some calls last night." Jonathan's voice was hoarse from lack of sleep, but steady. "Turns out people remember things. A friend of mine serves on a hospital board. He knew someone who worked at St. Mary's during the investigation. A Dr. Williams. He remembered the case very well. Remembered being pressured to change his statement about who was actually responsible." Richard's face drained of color. "Dr. Williams is willing to talk." Jonathan continued. "So is a nurse named Margaret Chen, no relation to the woman watching Lily who worked the same floor. She always thought something was wrong with how that investigation went. She's been waiting years for someone to ask the right questions." Richard's hands were shaking now. Visibly. Those are lies. You can't prove. I don't need to prove anything in a court of law. I just need enough people willing to tell the truth." Jonathan stepped closer. "You spent 2 years making sure Clara had no evidence, no voice, no way to fight back. But you forgot something. You forgot that people remember, and some of them have been waiting a long time to set the record straight." Clara stood beside Jonathan, silent. Her face was pale, but her spine was straight. She hadn't asked him to do this, hadn't expected it, but she wasn't running either. "This is blackmail," Richard said. His voice cracked on the word. "You're trying to blackmail me. Blackmail would be threatening to expose you unless you do what I want." Jonathan put his phone away. "I'm not threatening anything. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You're going to leave Clara alone. You're going to give her a clean reference. And you're going to find somewhere else to work. Because this hotel doesn't need a manager who destroys people's lives to protect himself. Richard stared at him. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. You can't do this, he finally managed. You can't just... I can. I will. Jonathan's voice dropped. You used her once. You destroyed her career, her marriage, her life. And then you followed her here to make sure she stayed down. That ends today. You don't understand. Richard's voice had changed. Smaller now. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I panicked. I made a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to let someone else pay for your failure. You chose to lie. Then you chose to spend 2 years making sure she couldn't rebuild. Richard's face crumpled. The professional mask fell away. Underneath was something raw, something pathetic. I was scared, he said. I had a family, kids. I couldn't lose everything. So you took everything from her instead. Richard didn't answer. His eyes went to Clara, and for the first time, Jonathan saw something other than contempt in them. Shame, ugly, crawling shame. Clara stepped forward. Jonathan expected her to rage, to unleash the anger she'd held for 2 years. She had every right, but she didn't. She just looked at Richard, studied his face, the sweat on his forehead, the tremor in his hands, the way he couldn't meet her eyes. I used to hate you, she said quietly. Every single day. For what you did. For what you took. Richard flinched. But looking at you now... Clara shook her head slowly. I don't hate you anymore. I just feel sorry for you. Richard's face twisted. Don't pity me. You've spent 2 years watching me, making sure I stayed down, reminding me what you did. Clara's voice was steady. But every morning, I wake up and I look at my daughter, and I know that when it mattered most, I did the right thing. I saved Mrs. Patterson's life. I made a choice I can live with, even when it cost me everything. She stepped closer. Richard backed up, hit the front desk. What do you wake up knowing? Richard, Clara asked. When you look in the mirror, what do you see? Richard's mouth opened. Nothing came out. You've been so busy keeping me silent that you never stopped to think about why. Clara's voice dropped. It's not because you're afraid I'll ruin your career. It's because every time you see me, you remember who you really are. And you can't stand it. Richard's eyes were wet. His hands gripped the edge of the desk behind him. I never meant... His voice broke. I didn't want it to... Then do something about it. Clara's voice softened. For once in your life, do the right thing. Not because someone's forcing you, not because you're scared of being caught, just because it's right. The lobby was silent. Sophie stood frozen. The bellhop had stopped pretending not to listen. Richard stood there, trapped, exposed, all his power, all his careful control stripped away. And then something shifted in his face. Not anger, not defiance, something that looked almost like relief. I'm sorry, he said. The words came out rough, barely audible. I'm sorry. Clara. Clara didn't respond, just watched him. Richard turned to Sophie. His voice was hollow. I need to speak with HR. There are corrections that need to be made. He paused. And I'll be submitting my resignation, effective end of this week. Sophie nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Richard looked at Clara one more time. His face was a ruin, years of carefully constructed lies collapsing. The patient, he said quietly. Mrs. Patterson, did she recovered? Clara said, she's alive. That's what mattered. Richard nodded once, then he walked away, toward the back offices, his shoulders hunched, his steps unsteady. Jonathan watched him go. Exhaustion was hitting him now, the sleepless night catching up. "You let him off easy," he said quietly. Clara shook her head. "I let him make a choice. That's more than he gave me." She turned to Jonathan. Her eyes were clear. The exhaustion was still there. But something else, too. Something that hadn't been there an hour ago. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me." "You made it hard not to." Clara's lips curved, just barely, almost a smile. "We should go check on Lily," she said. "She'll be wondering where I am." They walked toward the elevator together. Behind them, the lobby slowly returned to life. Guests checking out. Staff resuming duties. The ordinary business of morning. But Jonathan knew something had changed. Something that couldn't be undone. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. "What happens now?" Clara asked. Jonathan pressed the button for the penthouse floor. "Now," he said, "we figure out what comes next." The doors closed. Sunlight filled the penthouse. Jonathan stood by the window, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. His fifth of the morning, or maybe sixth, he'd lost count. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, and his neck ached from the hours hunched over his phone. But the warmth of the sun on his face felt good. Real. Behind him, Lily sat on the sofa, eating scrambled eggs from a room service tray. Clara had tried to refuse when he'd ordered breakfast, but Lily had already started eating before anyone could stop her. "She hasn't had a real meal since yesterday afternoon," Clara had said quietly. An explanation, not an excuse. Jonathan had just nodded, ordered more food, told her to sit down. That had been an hour ago. Now, the remains of breakfast covered the coffee table: eggs, toast, fruit, orange juice. Lily had eaten more than Jonathan thought possible for someone her size. Clara had barely touched her plate, but she'd had 2 cups of coffee. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. "I spoke to the day manager," Jonathan said, still facing the window. "Sophie, Richard's resignation is official. They're starting an internal review of his conduct." Clara was quiet for a moment. "And my job? Still yours, if you want it." He turned around. "But I figure you might want something better." Clara stared at him. Her coffee cup sat untouched in her hands. "What do you mean? I made some calls this morning, after the lobby." Jonathan moved to the chair across from her and sat down heavily. His body was starting to remind him he wasn't 25 anymore. "A friend of mine runs a healthcare consulting firm. They're always looking for people who understand how hospitals actually work. Case management, patient advocacy, that kind of thing. I don't have a license anymore." "You don't need one for administration." Jonathan shrugged. "There are options. If you're interested." Clara studied him. Her eyes moved across his face like she was still looking for the catch. "Why are you doing this? Doing what?" "All of it. Last night. This morning. The phone calls." She set down the cup. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I'm the woman who fell asleep in your room. So why?" Jonathan considered the question. He thought about Margaret, about the walls he'd built, about all the years he'd spent assuming the worst about everyone because it was safer than being wrong. "Because I almost called security on you," he said finally. "I looked at you and your daughter, and my first thought was that you were a threat, a problem to be managed." He paused. "I've been doing that for a long time, treating everyone like they want something from me." Clara listened, didn't interrupt. "You didn't ask me for anything," Jonathan continued. "You refused everything I offered. And when I finally understood what you'd been through, what you'd given up, I realized I've been protecting myself from the wrong people." "What do you mean?" "The ones who want to use me are easy to spot. They ask for things. They flatter. They negotiate." He met her eyes. "You just stood there and waited for me to decide. You didn't try to play me at all." I was too tired to play anyone. That's not why. Jonathan's voice softened. You didn't play games because that's not who you are. Even when everything was falling apart, you stayed yourself. That's rare. Clara looked down at her hands, the calluses, the burn scar. I don't feel rare, she said quietly. I feel tired. I know. Jonathan leaned forward. But tired isn't the same as broken. You can rest. You can rebuild. It doesn't have to be like this forever. Lily looked up from her eggs. Crumbs dotted her chin. Mama, can I show him Bun Bun? Clara smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. Sure, baby. Go ahead. Go. Lily slid off the sofa and walked over to Jonathan. She held out the stuffed rabbit, the one she'd been clutching all night. Up close. He could see it clearly now. Brown fur, worn thin in patches. One ear torn at the seam, stitched back together with blue thread that didn't match. This is Bun Bun, Lily said solemnly. He got hurt before. See his ear? Jonathan looked at the crooked stitching. Someone had sewn it carefully, but without any attempt to hide the repair. The blue thread stood out against the brown fabric. I see it, he said. Mama fixed him. Lily stroked the rabbit's head. He was really hurt, but she made him okay again. She looked up at Jonathan with those clear, serious eyes. He still has the OE, but he's okay now. Jonathan stared at the rabbit, at the visible scar, at the evidence of damage that hadn't been erased, just mended. He looks strong, Jonathan said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Lily nodded. Yeah, he's okay now. Okay. She took Bun Bun back and returned to the sofa. Settling against her mother's side, within minutes, her eyes were closing again. Clara's hand found her daughter's hair, stroked it gently. Jonathan watched them 2 years ago. Clara had lost everything. Her career, her marriage, her sense of self. She'd been pushed down so far that cleaning hotel rooms at 2 a.m. seemed like a victory. But she was still here, still fighting, still holding her daughter close. The interview, Jonathan said quietly. It's next Tuesday, 10 a.m. I'll send you the details. Clara looked up. I haven't said yes yet. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't take handouts. It's not a handout. It's a chance you've earned. What you do with it is up to you. Clara studied his face, looking for the catch, the hidden cost. She wouldn't find one. Okay, she said finally. I'll go to the interview. Good. Lily stirred in her sleep, murmured something. Clutched Bun Bun tighter. Clara stood slowly, carefully. We should go. I need to get her home. Take your time. I know. She gathered the canvas bag, checked Lily's shoes, all the small tasks of a mother preparing to leave. At the door, she paused, turned back. Jonathan. It was the first time she'd used his name. Thank you, she said. I mean it. I know. She nodded, lifted Lily onto her hip. The girl was getting too big for it, but she managed. The rabbit dangled from Lily's hand, its mended ear catching the light. Say, bye, Bun Bun, Lily mumbled, half asleep. The rabbit's paw waved limply. Jonathan found himself waving back. The door closed behind them. The penthouse was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the space that had felt so cold 12 hours ago. Jonathan walked back to the window, looked out at the city. He'd spent years building walls, protecting himself from everyone, assuming the worst. But maybe those walls had kept out more than just the people who wanted to hurt him. Maybe they'd kept out everything else, too. Clara would go to the interview. She'd probably get the job. She'd rebuild her life, not because he'd saved her, but because she'd never stopped fighting. And Lily would grow up knowing that her mother had stood in front of a stranger's judgment and refused to bend. Jonathan touched the window. The glass was cool against his palm. The rabbit had been torn. Someone had fixed it. The scar remained, but it was whole again. Maybe that was enough. If this story left something quiet sitting in your chest, that's all right. Some stories do that. They settle into places we didn't know were waiting. Many of us have stood where Clara stood, not in a penthouse, perhaps, but in moments where we carried something heavy and no one saw. Some of us have been misjudged. Some of us have been the ones who judged too quickly. And some of us have wondered, in the small hours, whether we'd have the courage to choose differently if given the chance. There's nothing here that needs to be fixed or explained. The weight you're feeling, it's allowed to stay for a while. It's allowed to rest without becoming anything more than what it is. Not every wound closes completely, but sometimes, like that old rabbit with his mismatched thread, we find ourselves whole enough, scarred. Yes, changed, certainly, but still here, still holding on to what matters most. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.